Chapter 7. The White Isle. It's very difficult to put into words exactly what Ibiza is and means, and it's equally as hard to convey why she's been part of my life for so long. But I always seem to find myself returning to the calls from the White Isle periodically throughout my life. But basically for me, Ibiza itself is a drug. It's highly fucking addictive, and after you've experienced your first trip, you either hate it and don't go back for more, or you're hooked and have found an inescapable new lease on life. You might have already guessed, but I got addicted to the home of dance music almost instantly. It's not just me either. I know scores of people who will tell you the same, and Ibiza Chris is a prime example. He went on holiday almost 20 years ago and has stayed ever since. He tried to move back to Manchester twice, but that move lasted about 3 weeks before he found himself bolting straight back to the island. That's how powerful the magnetism is. Anything goes in Ibiza, and everything is so out in the open, almost as if people leave all their inhibitions and taboos on the plane at Aeropuerto de Ibiza. Once a small fishing village in the Balearic Islands, there's been a loyal following of people that have visited Ibiza in my mind, for the same reasons you'd want to visit an island that promoted such transparency, and for all the right reasons. Since the 1930s, the island has been a bohemian affair for many. The 1970s saw a subtle change in the scenery and clientele. A few hotels emerged, but as a whole the island still allowed and promoted a breath of fresh air for those that wanted to loosen their top buttons and take off their belts, to be freer than those that had subscribed to a lifelong commitment in a conservative lifestyle in the modern world. Before I go any further, one promise I will make here and now is I won't start rattling on like an old man at the bus stop, with stories in tune with, "When I was a boy, all this was just fields." As the truth is, even before my love affair with the island, people had been coming to this jewel in the Mediterranean for a long time, and the fact remains, the largest of changes, along with the obvious scenic one, is the crowd size. When people came here, it was typically for the same reasons, and who wouldn't want to be with thousands of like-minded people all on the same vibe? But I will be honest and question why people now come to Ibiza. The beautiful island can be a one-size-fits-all destination with those that want to embrace its culture, music and the experience, but not at the cost of losing its true deep-rooted meaning and identity, and all the while being the best party island in the world. When I first started visiting Ibiza in the late 70s, the hippie mentality and live music scene was still extremely prominent. On the whole, the revelers weren't youngsters, and the island had a massive gay and transsexual scene. The most heterosexual person on the planet, with zero exposure to explicit scenes in his life, would walk past a gay sex show in a club window without even batting an eyelid. Inclusiveness is a buzzword today, but Ibiza was the definition of live and let live in the 80s and 90s. Something I've noticed that has never changed and remains reminiscent of the 70s and 80s, and that's people sleeping on the beaches all day. And there's two reasons why this happens. The first reason is that people are on holiday, and whilst they do want to party all night, they also like to enjoy some sunshine while they can. The second group of people will have their bags with them as they sleep on the playa, simply because they don't have any accommodation booked. This is probably the hippie mentality of Ibiza at play. Why waste money on hotels when you can sleep on the beach? Although it's not a bit of me, this isn't actually as trampy as it may sound, because the beaches have showers, toilets, and changing facilities. Plus, as I said, nothing is seen as strange there. Back in the day, it wasn't about hotels or luxuries, it was more about the music, partying, drugs and sex, generally having the time of your life, without judgment. Ibiza was your mistress for however long you wished to stay, and believe me, she's a temptress with the deepest and most honest of intentions that she'll allow you to find if you let her. I believe that you don't find Ibiza, she finds you. If you held a gun to my head and forced me to isolate just one example of an incredible memory from Ibiza, I'd have to tell you about the best night out I've ever had, which was at Pacha when Roger Sanchez was DJing. Every single track he chose was a proper tune, and each time he mixed the next one in, it was as if the crowd got a surge of energy. Sanchez didn't fly in to smash out a 30-minute set and fuck off. He played about an 8-hour set, which is massive for a big-name DJ. He must have loved playing, and it really showed through his work. This particular time I was staying at Pike's Hotel, as was my mate Jason. At the end of the night, we went outside, where it was still just about dark. Knowing that we stood no chance of getting a taxi, we walked to El Divinos, where I knew one of the doormen, and we bunged him €100 to drive us back to Pike's, because it was literally in the middle of nowhere, real Spanish-style middle of nowhere. The madness of the night wasn't quiet over yet, though. As the pair of us slowly came back down and longed for our beds, the journey ahead was to be a surreal one that we could have done without at the time. But looking back, it was funny. The doorman I knew was a top lad, really friendly and loved to chat with us lot. But that said, he was a big fucker. He was originally from a country in Africa, so you can imagine our surprise when this mountain-sized big black man said to us, "Good job you didn't get in an illegal taxi with one of those African motherfuckers. They'd have ripped you boys right off." It felt like an eternity ago that we'd left the motorway and headed down these back roads amongst some fields, when me and Jason simultaneously spotted the turning we needed and shouted it out. But it was too late. Our doorman-cum-taxi driver had missed it. I thought, great. Another few precious minutes of sleep lost before the chance of getting us back on track and in the direction we needed to go. But no sooner had this thought gone through my head when things quickly went in another direction. Literally. I quickly discovered our taxi had now become a stunt car, as I felt my world violently and completely going in another direction, one that under normal circumstances would have been questioned by the laws of both physics and gravity. He hung a hard right through some hedges and into a field. I said, "What the fuck are you doing, man?" now trying to find something to hold on to and steady my somewhat fragile state of mind and body. There are ways of coming down quickly and prematurely, and this was an unwelcomed one. He shrugged his shoulders, I'm guessing to assure us it was the sensible and justified move on his part, by adding, "It's okay, we can go this way, it's a 404, all the while remaining completely calm and relaxed. Bumping through these fucking fields, I just wanted to throw up. I don't know how I didn't actually. Imagine you're a bee, trapped inside a bottle, shaken aggressively and not knowing when the confusion would end. Then that would be close. As we finally approached the doors of the hotel, we were blessed with the famous Ibiza sunrise, something that millions of people get up early to enjoy, while millions of others only see on their way home whilst feeling worse for wear. As calming, heavenly and angelic as it was, I was of the mindset, yeah, great sight. Now where's my bed? Pike's was an experience in itself. Sadly, the legendary exclusive hotel is no longer run by the man himself, since he died in February 2019. But Tony Pike and his establishment certainly earned their place in the Ibiza history books. Under new management, the resort continues to operate to this day. All of the rooms were unique and most of the suites were themed in styles ranging from Moroccan to glass walls next to the swimming and even a cave. 5 nights here could easily end up setting you back 4K on checkout. One time when I was staying there, Muscle had just been released and someone told Tony who I was. He came over, introduced himself to me, and we got chatting. He took me to his son's grave, which was marked with a specially planted tree in the grounds of the hotel. The next time I stayed there, I took Tony a signed copy of Muscle, which he was made up with. Me and my crowd had arranged to go to a club, so Tony said he'd come too, and he was more than welcome. He said, "Let's go in my car, Carlton, I'll drive us." When I thanked him and said I'd get the others, he said that only I was allowed in his motor. Thinking maybe he had some business or something to discuss with me, I arranged to meet the others at the club, but as we arrived in his BMW, I realised that there was actually nothing specific. Halfway through the night, someone came to me and told me that a guy just gave Tony 3 Jack Jills, and I thought, fuck off, he's in his 70s, he could fucking die. I rushed through the crowd and brought Tony over to our VIP area so we could keep an eye on him. He was a fucking party animal, that man, even in his 70s, can you believe it? He was completely out of his box when he offered to drive me back to the hotel, an offer I politely declined as I'd already seen enough hedges and fields during a car ride on this trip and didn't fancy dying in a crash that night. He never even had a driving licence. The local police used to stop him regularly for drink driving, but I think because he was such a well-known businessman on the island, things were left to slide a little. I have some fond memories of Tony and Pike's Hotel. He was likeable and a very easy person to get along with. He wasn't complicated or difficult to understand as a human being. I found he had no ulterior motives and was approachable on any level. If you ever see or hear Tony doing an interview and talking about his life on the island with the celebrities he knew and spent time with, I have no doubt that all are true, and if anything, the stories he never told would have been enough to make even a sailor blush. A legendary Ibiza playboy, the Hugh Hefner of the Balearics, and an all-round good guy. R.I.P. Tony Pike. Ibiza can hold memories for as long as you want them to be part of your life. I remember the year that House Every Weekend was big, and listening to Martin Solveig play at Café Mambo. In fact, I sat there that evening, drink in and hand listening to his set and reminiscing about this exact spot years before. Mint Bar and Restaurant now joins Mambo and Café Del Mar, which was famous for euphoric dance records, as does the selection of small boats bobbing about waiting to be hired by couples who want to enjoy from the sea. They've each made the most of the excellent location that their bars undoubtedly have, by lining the outside area with tables, seating and patio heaters, allowing guests to sit in comfort, even warm themselves up if the sea breeze gets too chilly as they take in the vistas. Back in the day, there had been no such modern luxuries, and people happily sat on the rocks that separated the two venues from the sea, gathered together to adore the skyline and watch the sun slowly set, seemingly falling between two large rocks a few miles out to sea. Twin, the experience of an Ibizan sunset, spurious amounts of drugs, some banging tunes and not a care in the world. Then you'll get a taste of why I always tuned in and dropped out. Good times. There was a big group of us out there one year, mostly couples. We were walking to the bars after dinner one evening when we heard this horrific screaming coming from an alleyway. We told the women to wait on the main street while a few of us fellas went to check it out. I honestly thought a woman was being raped down this alley. We found that the screaming was coming from inside a nondescript door, so we burst through it, ready to smash up what we'd imagined to be a man attacking a woman. We had actually charged in through the emergency exit of a tattoo studio, where the screaming woman was having her neck tattooed. The tattoo artist stopped working and looked at us, completely bemused. We just turned right around and briskly marched back to where we'd came from. When Nigel Benn was DJing, I went to Ibiza with him as his minder shortly after Tony died. I took Lynn with me and some of the other fellas, who had partners along for the ride too. We all stayed in an incredibly trendy castle-themed mansion while we were there, which was cool. Nigel played at a big club one night, and when he finished his set, we headed for S Paradise, a famous club on the waterfront that is recognisable mostly by its glass pyramid roof and the Ibiza slingshot sitting next to it. It was always a plush venue that went all out. There was always something special happening to enhance the atmosphere, such as dancers overhead, water spraying, and sometimes they did the neon paint thing. But this particular night we walked in about 20-handed to a foam party. In true Ibiza style, there were couples romping and frolicking in the foam and on the edge of the dance floor, while the rest just partied all around them. Recalling the memories from that night reminded me just how many footballers and celebrities you used to meet in the VIP areas, and how even the most famous of DJs used to mix with the revelers at parties and in restaurants. Making the most of the long weekend there, we also partied at Amnesia and Manumission on other nights. Amnesia was good, but Manumission stands out in mind as being a fucking mad one. The place wasn't even full with 8,000 ravers inside. The tunes were blinding and the atmosphere insane. I've got too many tales of great times in Ibiza to even put into a book. Sometimes I'll even hear a track on the radio and it will take me back to a specific moment on the island from years ago. Across my many vacations to Ibiza, I've taken copious amounts of coke, chewed through ease like sweets, sank vodka by the litre, jumped off of balconies and rooftops into swimming pools, dived off of a fast-moving boat, and fuck knows what other crazy shit I've done. And all the while under some of the best mind-altering chemical enhancements. By rights, I probably should be dead because of it all. But somehow, the worst that's happened to me are hangovers and some week-long come-downs. If I had my time again, would I do things differently? Bollocks, would I? I absolutely loved it. This was an island, where your own personal experience could be one of your own making and natural rhythmic fashioning. And if I could handle a little bit more mind-altering chemical intake than the next man, then lucky me. But would I want my kids or grandchildren to do half the things I've done in the name of clubbing? Most definitely not. In all the years past, I've barely clenched a fist in Ibiza, never mind had to have a tear up. Maybe it was because I was 20 stone of muscle, or maybe it was due to my reputation, but I think it actually speaks for how the island used to be. I do believe that ecstasy made the rave scene, but cocaine spoilt it. Hopefully, as with most trends, we'll see a full circle on this and go back to the start, back to times before the flashiness and showing off, when it genuinely was all about the music, dropping out and fitting in, everyone on the same vibe. Whilst we're on the subject of fitting in and being on the same vibe, now is as good a time as ever to mention and reintroduce someone that was never on our vibe, in my league, our league, and out of his fucking league, until I opened all of the doors that he's stepped through and been given a great deal of wealth. Maxi, Maxi needs to remember that he's got no real backing or bollocks. He's truly trying to walk in shoes that don't fit him, and like most people that have tried walking in both my shoes, and the path of organised crime, there is no rite of passage. Unless you're willing and able to bite back, people, real proper people, will soon see right through you and your bark. And the hired help won't be able to protect you from the big bad wolves that are out there. So, when I invited Maxi to come over to Ibiza many times, with me as my guest to enjoy both the island and all that she had to offer, like the small-minded person he is, and the same traits as an insecure child, he always found an excuse to cower away and work the same deals that I'd set him up with. After some heavy convincing, he followed, actually stumbled is a more accurate description, along for his first trip to Ibiza, all the while hiding in my shadow. Much like a kid who's never been exposed to anything other than what was handed to him, he really was like a fish out of water. At first, it was a bit embarrassing. I thought it was a mistake bringing him to the island. He never fitted in, and was clearly clumsy and awkward with the people I gave him introductions to, and the settings that he wasn't accustomed with. Talk about trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. When finally, again, after being assured he was in safe company, he actually followed my advice and opened his eyes a little, he saw the opportunities on offer from me and my circle of people. Then, after his first ever pill, a sip of the good stuff and loosening his top button, he realised that there was more to the island than just the stories he'd heard about. Maxi had taken the next, small step in becoming a man. In business, especially businesses in island communities, people talk, and it's quite common in certain types of business ventures. Those with no backing, money and muscle are taken advantage of. Where there's lots of money, there's people that are quite happy and capable of taking it from you. It was around 2011 when, knowing that I have connections and people all over the place, Maxi asked me to find out about a firm of Spaniards that they were considering buying out of a nightclub deal in Ibiza. To ensure a smooth business transition and no liberties taken, my name was put forward as a person of involvement and part of the equation. I got them the info they needed, and they went on to do the deal with both security and confidence. They told me to treat the place as my home, come and go as I liked, do what I want, pay for nothing. They were just grateful things had happened as a result of my involvement and to have me behind them. The first year of them opening their club, they flew me out for the grand opening, an all-expenses paid deal, and nothing was too much effort for them to make me feel welcomed. Of course, they had their own agenda, being that they'd now parade me around the VIP section, an obvious move really. They had to show there was validity in my involvement. Word would now spread that they really had me in their corner, both back home and on the famous Spanish party island. The following year, my daughter Carly flew out for a weekend to see what the new venue was all about. Our last night there together ended up being crazy for all the wrong reasons though, as egos and alcohol mixed can be a proven recipe for disaster, especially with those that can't handle either in the most basic of settings. It all started with some club and bar owners arguing and fighting who just happened to be in the owner's VIP section. I was completely out of my tree when the argument escalated from name-calling to actual threats involving both violence and my name. "I'm going to pay Carlton Leach €10,000 to break your legs, you prick," with a reply of, "Well, I'll pay him €20,000 to throw you off your fucking balcony." And so it continued, with the childish, silly rich fuckers going on, as did my faded dancing. That was until Carly couldn't take any more and put every single one of them in their place, like the bunch of children they were. "Listen to your fucking selves, would ya? None of you cunts are going to get my dad involved in your stupid shit, or I'll do you myself." That pretty much settled that, to be fair. But my takeaway from that little turnout once I'd come back down to planet Earth was the way they talked about me like I was their property, like some attack dog that would work for a treat. The cheeky bastards. I've worked with money and violence most of my life, but I'm no one's pet, nor do I fetch on command. My most recent trip to the island was once again spurred on by an invitation from Maxi, and I don't need much convincing, so I said I'd happily see him there for the closing parties. But this time, that invite and stay was a lot different, and as I quickly found out, it was a far cry from my treatment in previous years. As we headed through Ibiza's only commercial airport to collect our luggage, my phone started pinging with missed calls and messages. I thought, fuck me, I've only had it off 2 hours. I almost didn't bother checking it, but luckily I did, as I had a WhatsApp message from my brother and good friend, Maxi, saying that he wouldn't be able to pick us up after all. I was pretty fucked off, But I decided there and then I was always going to enjoy my holiday here, as no matter the change of mind or level of friendship once offered, and regardless of Maxie's changing attitude towards me, Ibiza was an island I had been visiting for decades, and it was mine to escape to, not from. As we stood waiting for our cases at the belt, I told Jay of Maxie's selfish and impersonal actions, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll call the judge. He won't let us down." Bags in tow, we came out of the terminal building and found a shaded spot to keep out of the Balearic sun while we waited for our ride. As I stood there in my shorts and shirt ready to embark on another big Ibiza adventure, I couldn't but think and ask myself, why would you invite someone to fly to another country, only then to treat them so disrespectfully and to add further insult to injury, then tell them via a text message that you're now letting them down? You had to question this mongrel thinking, as even a simpleton would see that Maxie had an ulterior motive from the start. What further proved how low this person was, I watched how courteous and accommodating the cab drivers were in their white Mercedes taxis picking up the same passengers from our plane. Even here, total strangers had been given a level of courtesy and reliability from someone they'd never met, and this was in a foreign land. Then there were people's friends pulling up in BMWs and Range Rovers to take their waiting pals off for a good time. And then here I am, invited over and left out to dry, standing there like a plank, waiting. There was only one person to blame for this scenario, and the little wank stain that he is couldn't even be bothered in handling the situation like a gentleman and give a justified reason, or even muster up a coward's excuse for not turning up or at least sending someone. What's the judge driving, mate? Is he in that G55 again? As I finished my question to Jay, I hear some music from a car stereo and looked across to see a Land Rover covered in grass, slowly approaching us. Now when I say grass, I don't mean this thing had gotten a bit dirty. I mean it was covered in artificial fucking grass. The car's paintwork was entirely concealed by green plastic grass. Only the windows were visible. Before I could even finish thinking, what the fuck has that guy done to his car? Chris Judge's head comes out of the window. "I hope, guys, I got here as fast as I could for yous." Don't get me wrong, it was brilliant of Chris to turn out for us at short notice. I really appreciated it, we all did. But as I climbed into the back of this thing, I was just hoping no one had recognised me. Chris was driving this motor due to a work thing, and in actual fact, he ended up proper looking after us all week, taking us to see new places and parts of the island, driving us to bars and clubs, making sure we always got back to our hotels no matter what time. So even though I would have preferred a grass-free mode of transport, thanks to Chris for being there for us. Chris didn't just run us about, he's a right nice fella, and it was nice to have him party with us throughout the week too. I've never done business with Chris. I know him through Jay and Bill, aka the missing man, but the no-strings-attached kind of friendship and level of respect from Chris, who I barely knew, puts the likes of Maxie and his ethics, or lack thereof, to shame. One lunchtime, a few of us went into Ibiza, or Ibiza Old Town as it's commonly known amongst the British tourists. We strolled in the Balearic sun, around the artisan market, through the cobbled back streets, mooched in and out of some cracking shops all around the town, just generally soaking up the atmosphere. You pretty much forget about time when you're in Ibiza. You don't check your phone every 15 minutes, and it's rare I look at my watch. You just eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, swim if you fancy, and party the rest of the time. We went into the Hard Rock Cafe that day for lunch. Hard Rock is kind of like an international institution. There isn't anywhere else quite like it, and I love the food. After my meal, I went into the gents and I nearly fell over. The walls and floor were tiled in the trippiest pattern I've ever seen. The cubicle doors the same so you couldn't define the two, all topped off by carefully placed mirrors to freak you right out. I'd only had 2 drinks, but I turned and walked straight back out the door, which, by the way, wasn't that easy to find. Whoever designed those bathrooms had a proper good laugh at the thought of all these tourists with hangovers having flashbacks and freaking out whilst trying to find the toilet. As we strolled back towards the taxi rank, I thought back and considered how much even Ibiza had changed over the last 20 years. The atmosphere was still brilliant, don't get me wrong, but there were a lot more pubs full of people just drinking to get drunk, rather than drinking and enjoying the Ibizan magic. I'm sure when half of those hanging out of both the pub doorways and their arses the following morning couldn't tell you one bar's name from the next, only how many times they fell over or threw up. When I walked these same streets years before, I had enjoyed street artists, live performances and more colourful surroundings. There had been more eateries than pubs, although great restaurants are still plentiful in the old town. One morning I made it down to the restaurant around 11 a.m. Jem had gone ahead about a half an hour before, so she was already at the big corner table with Kieran, Kaylee, Chris, Sam and Jay. Lenny, I presumed, wasn't out of bed yet. "Ready to order lunch now, Carlton?" Jay was taking the piss due to the time. I don't know how, but no matter what we drunk the night before, he was always at breakfast by 08:30. I replied, "I'm not sure if I can even stomach breakfast, to be honest. I feel fucking terrible, fuck knows why. I only had a few drinks and one pill." They all rolled up laughing at me. Gemma explained that at one point in the night I'd turned to all our lot in the VIP area, poked my tongue out to reveal 4 pills, then proceeded to wash them down with vodka straight from the bottle. I denied it, but I knew they were almost certainly telling the truth. As Chris started recalling the previous night's events, including a story about a short, bald man in hot pants, it all started flooding back to me like a crazy trip. Let me go back to the day before at the club. Day clubs are a new thing in Ibiza, and as you may have gathered, I'll try most things once. I know now that it's not for me. I much prefer proper clubs, but I gave the concept a right good tryout before deciding. We'd been at Maxi and Rana's venue since mid-afternoon, and Maxi hadn't bothered to show his face. He sent me a text saying he was ill, but I knew for a fact he was at a different venue with Tamer Hussein. Here, his choices and actions were gradually revealing his contempt for me. As I said previously, people seem to have short memories, and as the saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt. Coincidentally, that afternoon would bring another prime example of this. An old friend of mine, who we'll call Scouse, had flown out from Essex and met up with us. There was a crowd of people sitting together chilling out when Scouse made a nasty and uncalled-for comment about Gemma. It might sound ridiculous to some to even consider reacting to this, but he had broken unwritten rules and was testing me. If you know me and have something to say about me or the woman I choose to be with, you should speak to me directly, man to man, not make a childish attempt to make her feel small in order to make yourself feel funny or tough. Scouse has now laid a challenge down to me, and I wish he hadn't because we'd been mates for years. He was a football player, and DJ, I'd put him in on earners over the years because I liked him, but in hindsight that was my mistake as he wasn't of the ilk required to operate at my level of criminality. I thought about phoning Scouse, but that wasn't me. Next I considered taking him to one side and having this out with him, but given that his disrespect was so public there was only one way to deal with this. I spoke the scenario over with Lenny, who by the way is a sound fella. I did him a turn 20 years or so ago and he's been there for me in return ever since. Len agreed that I'd come to the correct conclusion, and I asked him, Jay, Kieran and the other men to keep back as I went over to see Scouse with all his pals. I didn't need them to back me up. As I walked over, I hoped he would just do the right thing and apologise, but his ego prevailed, and when I called him out he got proper lemon. I smacked him straight in the mouth, which is exactly what he deserved for being a gobby cunt. As natural reaction took place, he clutched his mouth and turned his face away, at which point I decided not to weigh him in. It didn't warrant it. In my mind, I'd made my point and was willing to leave it there. Security quickly circled and some of the casual acquaintances with our group tried to calm things. For me, it was finished, and just when I was about to go back to my table, spraying blood from his lip, he shouts, "What, is that it?" Maybe his ego had fueled a reaction within him, and he wanted to try and hold on to what little credibility he had as a man. Laughable, really. Anyone worth their weight wouldn't have walked away from that comment lightly, and I'll fight anyone, win or lose, and that's fine by me, so long as it's known I don't back down. But at that time, a flash thought was a simple truth. I was in my 50s with absolutely nothing to prove to anyone, and I'm not going to waste my energy rucking with youngsters high on coke. He wasn't even a challenge. But the fact remained he'd now pushed things, so fuck that previous flash thought. I pulled out my blade and said, "Have it your way. Come here now. I'll open you up like a fucking can of beans." He wouldn't step to me. He quietly muttered something under his breath and shuffled away, nursing his split lip as his pals again moved closer to try to calm things. Big W put a hand on my shoulder and said, "See, he ain't worth it, mate. Don't do it. You'll get banged up." I could have stabbed Scouse and probably got away with it. I doubt many people there would have given evidence against me, and I had the clout to lose any CCTV too, but it was enough. Job done, as there's no glory in kicking a dog when it's down. I'm sure he went back to his room, playing over in his mind what he should have done, but he caused and brought on more damage and injury to himself that day than what I did. He showed he didn't have the arsehole to back up what he thought he could get away with anyway. Fuck him. The Ibiza sun was setting over the sea, and it was time to crack on with my true agenda. Party Ibiza style. Late into the night and everyone in the VIP area is absolutely smashed. Everyone was having a great time, and if the magic of Ibiza can get Jay and Lenny dancing, then my point is proven, and she's worked her magic once again. I remember vividly I was dancing about on the edge of things when I saw Sarah lift off the ground, seemingly 3 feet in the air, and in movie-style slow motion, she flew towards the swimming pool, crashed down every one of the stairs, and just fell short of landing in the water. I started dancing towards her. The dancing was out of my control. I just couldn't stop, as the rest of our lot ran in her direction to help. As she lay by the pool unconscious, Lenny went apeshit. He's not small and he can raise his voice, so I can understand why the normal folks who had paid to be in the VIP area started to move away as he roared, "Who the fuck done that to my missus? I'll fucking kill you!" He was spinning around looking for the culprit to fight, whilst undecidedly trying to make his way to check on his wife. Again, I saw everything in slow-mo. "Sarah!" Through my eyes, Len was doing a Baywatch-style run towards the scene. The ladies in our group quickly organised a medic and saw to poor Sarah while the blokes grabbed Lenny and informed him that in fact, it was he who had just knocked his wife crashing down the stairs in his attempt at throwing some shapes, so there wasn't anyone to fight. We learnt the next day just how battered and bruised Sarah was. She couldn't even get down the hotel steps for the next 3 days, so we kept going to the bar by their hotel pool at lunchtime to see them. Lenny did feel fucking awful, but unfortunately for him, that didn't stop us ribbing him for months to come about his dance moves. You could say he brought breakdancing to a whole new level. A quick warning to anyone visiting these new day clubs: stay out of the pools. If I had a $5 for every time I saw a man or woman look at the queue for the loo, then only wander into the pool up to their waist and do a little 30-second long jig, then proceed to fuck off back to their mates, well, I'd have come home with more cash than I went with, the dirty bastards. A few nights later, we celebrated Kieran and Kaylee's anniversary by crawling a few bars, then hitting a club. When it was time to leave, Kaylee unwittingly went outside to try and get a taxi. Now, if you've been to Ibiza before, you know how hard it is to get a taxi if you haven't booked one or organised a private car or pirate, as they're called by local police. Kaylee returned to our table looking pretty pleased with herself and announced that everyone should hurry up because the car is waiting outside. It was proper lucky. This man said he could take us all to the hotel, so I gave him €50 and he's pulling his car round to the front. Needless to say, we didn't rush to the exit, but once we finished cracking up with laughter, we did explain Kaylee's faux pas to her. After another great night out towards the end of the week, me and Gemma got back to our hotel in the early hours of the morning. I was still buzzing, so I poured a large brandy, but just as I sat down at the dining table, there was an almighty crashing sound. The room lit up with a bright white light, and I thought, what the fuck? We rushed to the balcony to take a look, and we could hardly make out the swimming pool due to the torrential rain. I'm talking like the sky had opened up and the earth was being replenished. A real tropical downpour. It made the heavy rain back home look like a shower. The thunder and lightning continued for hours, and I sat and watched the storm from my balcony in absolute amazement. I've never experienced a thunderstorm quite like that, I remember. As the lightning struck, you could see that it stretched for miles across the Mediterranean. One of Ibiza's many magical natural moments was unfolding in front of me. It looked like she was stretching her fingers across the dark sky, if only for a few seconds. In all honesty, I thought some of my enjoyment was probably chemically enhanced, but the next day I learned that Jay and his missus had sat up watching it too, so I wasn't a complete lunatic. That was the year I saw Anthony Joshua in Lineker's bar and went over to meet him. He and his mates were all chatty enough, and I told AJ he'd be world champ within 18 months. By the following year, it turned out I was right. Our final night out that year was a closing party. Closing parties in Ibiza are a powerful experience. It's as if the whole island is experiencing a mix of emotions, sad and nostalgic, that it's the final party of the season, but elated at the same time, knowing that it's going to be such an incredibly special event that you're part of. The evening hadn't turned to night yet, and our waitress sheepishly approached our VIP table and somewhat unwillingly handed me the bill. As I looked down at it, she explained that I'd hit the limit set by the owners, and we should start paying for our drinks. Maxie's sheer rudeness, disrespect and short memory were not the young lady's fault, so I politely explained that she should get him on the phone. She went back to the bar and fetched someone else to have a try at explaining the situation to me, and that they hadn't been able to reach Maxi by phone. "It's okay, I'll sort it out with him," I explained. "You're only doing your jobs." Maxi answered in 2 rings when I called with the usual bullshit. "My brother, how are you? Are you having a good time? I'm sorry I haven't seen you." I set about reminding him of a small sample of the things I've done for him over the years, some of which contributed to the fact that he was now an Ibiza club owner in the first place, about how he had paraded me around the club in previous years, and told me that it was my club as much as his. "I'm going to hand my phone to this nice young lady, and you're going to correct the situation, yes?" Before he could finish apologizing to me, the waitress had the phone to her ear, and when she handed it back to me, she confirmed that there had been a mistake, and there was no limit to my drinks. The ladies in our group that night were very down to earth, proper decent human beings. They could have easily been a bit flash, but they actually had more class and character than the stuck-up millionaires we were surrounded by. Recognizing how awkward the waitress felt, having to request money and being asked to get one of her bosses on the phone, our lot chatted to her and made her more comfortable coming to our area than any other in the club that night. She probably got treated better by us commoners than by anyone who had frequented the VIP area all year. For the exceptional service we received all night long, we had a whip round and organised a nice tip which she was blown away by at the end of her shift. It shows you that you can't buy class or humility, and I maintain more integrity than those with short memories and big bank accounts. I don't consider myself to be famous, but I do tend to get recognised from time to time. When you're in Ibiza, people are always looking out for famous stars because it's well known that the place attracts people from all walks of life, and when you're in a club's VIP area, people really look and study who's in there, wondering who can afford that table. This is especially true when you're pumped up on steroids, wearing shorts and sporting tattoos all over your body. As Ibiza has become flashier and posy, full of pretentious twats and table whores, this trend became accentuated, as I learnt in the 2013 season when we arrived at Blue Marlin by yacht. I'm not claiming this was my yacht, by the way. Big vessels can't get close to the shore there, so Blue Marlin send small boats out to collect you and bring you to their venue. And as we headed to our area, I realised that there were scores of stuck-up bellends in 300 shorts, looking to see how much my watch was worth and thinking, my goodness, who are these riff-raff, and how on earth can they afford to be in here with us? Back in the day, I did used to get recognised, but I've noticed this strange new phenomenon emerged. On at least 5 occasions over my last 2 visits, someone has held their smartphone up in line with my face to compare me to a photo on Google. It is you, ain't it? You're Carlton Leach, right? I don't mind at all, and my usual response is, I hope so. But even so, what a strange thing that people look you up online to see if it's you. During the summer season, Ibiza has always filled with party-goers from diverse backgrounds, all with a mutual love of dance music and a hedonistic culture. But I can't help but feel that some of what we used to go for has been lost to time, and youngsters are now chasing a version of the real Ibiza, a pre-planned package deal with an all-in-one magical experience. That unique magic may have passed on, or perhaps it hasn't passed on, and the day will come that the chavs will congregate elsewhere, trying to impress each other and following the cultural trend of saying, I went to Ibiza and it was amazing, letting Ibiza go back to its far less commercial roots once again. People didn't used to party for 24 hours a day. We used to party at night, then sleep and eat a little bit through the day before going again. Maybe a lot of people didn't get the memo that you can't sustain partying in good spirits without any rest. It's an incredible shame that probably 90% of visitors to the White Isle won't ever get to experience the other side that Ibiza has to offer, the beautiful and equally magical side that the island discreetly reserves for those who are adventurous enough, both in body and mind, to explore and discover. If you find yourself at a loose end and considering a last-minute weekend away, even in winter, please consider Ibiza. Any time of the year, hire a car and drive into the mountains. Get a taxi driver to take you off the beaten track, or go on a boat ride and ask the captain about the coves. There is so much that only locals know about, but if you start to ask the right questions, they'll help you discover things you otherwise wouldn't. And remember that life and the island is more about the experience and adventure, not social media and bragging rights.